Hello, everyone. Really, thanks for coming that early in the morning. So I will be talking about Microsoft, Java, and open source. It's like a really interesting topic to discuss. I have to be straightforward and honest with you. I kind of joined Microsoft like 4 months ago. And being part of Microsoft, it's really an interesting experience and a journey because before joining Microsoft, really I was working mainly with open source technologies. And I myself, I'm a Java programmer, so that's my primary language. So like 6 months ago when Microsoft called me and they kind of said, would you like to become a technical evangelist for Microsoft? I was like, are you guys joking? I mean, did you check my LinkedIn profile? I mean, I'm not really a Microsoft guy. So they said, no, we really need guys that are from the open source community. So come check what we are doing. And if you like us, kind of join us. So speaking about that, that was the, let's say, traditional view on Microsoft or the technology of Microsoft that has. And that was the, let's say, the view in my head like couple of, I wouldn't say a couple of years ago. That's what Microsoft was for me. I've been working on various projects and, from time to time I had to deal with Microsoft technologies, the usual stuff, connectors to Office 365, Outlook, Active Directory, things like that. But, I mean, that was pretty much all that I've done. So, during the years, I kind of started noticing that Microsoft is kind of changing. And for me, really this started with the adoption of Linux on Azure, running the SQL Server on Linux. And at some point, I guess the tipping point for me was when Microsoft released the Windows subsystem for Linux, which kind of allowed me to have the Linux shell on Windows. And I finally switched from my Mac to Windows, which kind of provided me with everything that I needed. But if you take a look at Azure as a platform, you will notice, and that's actually the information that I got, that 1 out of 3 machines or offerings at Marketplace are running on Linux or open source. You will see that Microsoft is partnering with Red Hat. A couple of days ago, I actually met a guy from Red Hat that was MVP. This is Microsoft's most valuable professionals, which was also interesting. And also, Microsoft kind of joined the Eclipse Foundation. So things has been really changing. So if you look at Microsoft or the new Microsoft, you will see that considering Azure, Microsoft is really covering a very broad number of technologies, including a large set of the open source world. But you don't really need to take my word for it. These are some of the headlines that I got from the last couple of months. Microsoft has been announced as one of the largest contributors to GitHub. To be honest, I rarely look at the documentation of Microsoft websites. I go directly to GitHub and pretty much I find everything that I need related to JDKs, documentation, samples, stuff like this. And, it's Microsoft as a company started to change. So if you look at what it has to offer as an application, as a platform, you will see that there's like a lot of things, considering starting from running different virtual machines, the scale set, the container service, and last but not least, maybe the service fabric would be something very interesting, considering the idea of microservices. You can pretty much run anything on top of this one. If you consider the container portfolio, you will see also some very interesting names. Specifically, I will kind of take a look or a deeper dive in the DCOS from Mesos, where you can run a lot of stuff. And it's really, it now provides a lot of capabilities. So if you look at the Java, or what Microsoft has to offer for Java, You can start with the pure virtual machines where you can kind of pretty much run everything and kind of use it as information as a service, and kind of go all the way to platform as a service where you can run things like Cloud Foundry, and it's really pretty straightforward and provides you this flexibility. So once I entered Microsoft, I kind of started asking myself, right, I kind of took the leap. I decided to trust the company and see, what it has to offer. So, but what is really there for Java developers? What does it offer for a Java developer like me? I have to be honest, straight honest, my C# is not that sharp. I would use Java, I would use Node.js, I would use Python, but I rarely use C#. So as a developer, I started looking what can I really do. So if you look at the different kind of operating systems and kind of tools, you will start noticing some of the very familiar names and tool sets. For example, Jenkins, Maven, MySQL, JElastic, of course, and Cloud Foundry, as I mentioned. And something that's been kind of standing here, it's a very small logo, and it's actually the Hadoop stack. I will kind of take a deeper look at it because I believe it's a really, really rich area, and considering that we are more or less in the field of big data, it would be interesting for you guys to cover. So it's not only me. I kind of found a couple of names of customers of Microsoft that are running on Java, and you will see that there are some really, really interesting names there that kind of brings perspective on who is kind of trusting the service to run it there. I have to be honest that I was a little bit surprised that there is actually a Java Development Center in Microsoft that you can kind of go and start exploring what's really for Java developers. There is additional area where you can see code samples specifically for Java. And if you go to GitHub, you will find a really, really rich set of repos, including some of the SDKs for a large part of the services that actually has been open sourced. You can see the source, modify it, and kind of contribute to it. So really, considering all this, you really have like large number of options there. Now, it's not only the open source part, but also there is a bunch of services that are, let's say, more or less native to Azure. And what I have found out is that for these services, usually there is a Java SDK. So you can kind of benefit, and even if you are not running on open source and you decide to use some of the services that are in Azure, there is actually a Java API that you can use. And really, there is a place there that you can start checking the SDKs and start using them. Also, there is a very interesting sample application that you can actually go and explore, and it will actually provide you an overview of the services that you can use, the Java SDKs for these services, and kind of give it a try. A few more things. There's a bunch of plugins that can help you with your Java development on Azure. The plugins are available for Eclipse and IntelliJ. Personally, I'm using IntelliJ, and I believe there is a pretty rich set, both for Azure and for Hadoop specifically. Whoops, I kind of skipped one slide. Something that I wasn't aware of is that Microsoft is actually contributing to Java, that Jenkins is running their infrastructure on Azure. And actually, you have a really, really rich set of plugins for Jenkins that you can use on Azure. Last but not least, as I mentioned, Microsoft is really part of the Eclipse Foundation, which speaks for itself. So overall, if you kind of look as a Java developer, if you go to the Azure platform, there's like really a lot of things that you can do. Now, previously, I've been on positions of solution architect, so a large part of my job was to kind of come up with a solution that's really you can build fast. You should reuse something existing. I was always pressured to have POC or something quickly, to build up something quickly that we can show to the customer that's working. And one of the, say, the comparisons for Azure services that I kind of find interesting is that you can use them as a Lego blocks in a way that you can decide, I would like to pick this, that, and something else, and really combine them into solution and kind of come up with a solution very fast that you can use it to iterate and after that refine and work on it. And my previous employers, Cisco, and a company that has been a silver partner for Hortonworks, in this role I've really started working on Internet of Things. And I don't think that people really realize that Internet of Things is very much related to big data. If you kind of look at what I have here, I would say that these are the 4 blocks for the Internet of Things solution. But you can really separate them in 2 parts. First part would be really connecting devices to Internet. And the other part would be interacting with the information that's coming from these devices so that you can actually make sense of it. And that's what really, I believe, is the value of the Internet of Things. So if you look at the overall pattern for connecting devices, you will see that you will need one part for connecting the devices and really a kind of a layer that would be used for kind of a data ingestion, getting all these large amount of data or streams of data that are coming to you. And on the back-end side, you will see that you will have something as analytics, something to make sense of these data. You will either analyze it in real time as a stream, that's the so-called hot pot, or you will kind of take this information, store it, and make some processing on top of it. And if you look at this diagram, you will kind of start seeing some of the familiar open source, let's say, tools. But when I started my exploration in Azure, I found out that's really a huge amount of services. And these services are part of the services that are available from Azure, and they're organized in a way that kind of show you which are the things that you can use for connecting devices and analyzing all these data. But still, it's really a lot of services to review and to decide what to use. So Microsoft actually came up with something that's called IoT Suite. It's actually a collection of these services that are pre-configured for you in 2 different solutions. One is for remote monitoring, and the other is for predictive maintenance. And it's really a package of all the services that are available for you. You can kind of provision these solutions and start exploring and working on those. Now, because today I won't be showing any live demos, we have a workshop that's scheduled for tomorrow. And in this workshop, I will actually go over some of this stuff, like connecting devices using Java and analyzing some of this data. So if you are interested to really find out more about it, just come to the workshop tomorrow. So once you have the pre-built solution, you can really kind of customize it in pretty much any way using these services to have a solution for you. But again, looking at all the services, it's really a lot. I was thinking where I can actually start for this to make sense for me as a developer. So I kind of focused on the part that's for data ingestion, and that's the IoT Hub. And IoT Hub is really, I would say, a unique offering, which kind of provides you a way to connect devices securely, provide authentication mechanism, and manage all the devices that you are connecting. You can consider the IoT Hub something as a message queue or an event broker, if you wish, but it's with some value-added service on top of it that you can actually manage the devices and provision credentials for the devices and really kind of work with those. So going into the IoT Hub, I found out there's actually a large set of SDKs. It was not just C# as I expected. And I was really surprised to find that it's not only Java, but also you have JavaScript through Node.js, and also there's a Python SDK. So I was, okay, that's really, really great. So I started looking at it, and it turns out that you also have this open source on GitHub. Specifically for Java developers like me, you can use Maven to build your projects and kind of provision all the dependencies that you have. And also you have a bunch of support tools which are not only running on Windows, but actually this guy here, the IoT Hub Explorer, is something that's been developed on Node.js, and it kind of helps you to provision, debug, and work with the devices. But that's purely, speaking on the IoT Hub. So looking at the IoT suite, that's the reference architecture for the remote monitoring, you can see all the services that has been connecting. And I kind of lost my pen, so yeah. So you can see the data ingestion, stream analytics, storing the data, and really working with all those data. But these are really the services from, oops. Just give me a second. I think I have a small problem with my presentation. Sorry about that. Before starting the presentation, there's been a lot of changes, finding the right adapter to actually work and show like nice colors. So let's kind of give it a try again. And yeah, you will get a little bit dizzy until I get to the right slide here. Sorry about that. So maybe I can do something else. Yeah. So I was talking about the various services. So you will have the data ingestion part, and also the stream analytics and pretty much everything that you need to provision the data. It's very strange. I can't pass through this slide, so probably I'll skip it. All right. So looking at the previous slide, you will see all the green points for which actually represent the Java SDK that you will find for the specific service. But the topic that I really find interesting, and the topic that I don't think that a lot of people realize the power that lies behind it, is the HD Insights. And I mean, it's not really the name that you're kind of familiar, but what really HD Insight is. Now, Microsoft has partnered with Hadoop to bring HD Insight. So Hortonworks are the guys that are taking the standard Hadoop stack that you will have. They will kind of customize it, make it more stable, and kind of create it in a way that's suitable for the enterprise and the enterprise needs. So that's pretty much what you are getting on Azure when you are provisioning Hadoop clusters. So if you look at the Hortonworks data platform, you will see pretty much all the projects that are available in Hadoop are also used in this platform in a way that it's more streamlined. So when you are getting the Azure on HD Insight, you're actually getting this in a way that it's a managed service by Microsoft. And I don't think that a lot of people realize it, but if that's a managed service from Microsoft, you are also getting support for Hadoop. So this means that if you call in the middle of the night and you say, I have this query on Hadoop and it's like, I'm very angry that it's running very slowly, there will be someone from Microsoft to support you. So in a way, Microsoft is supporting open source tools. And also the other part would be really the elasticity of this. So you can start with a really small cluster so for working with your data and kind of scale it out in a way to use it. So what's really in the HD Insight? I will just go over some of the things that are available there. First of all, you will have Hive, which is the SQL-like database with queries. You will have the HBase as a way to use it as a NoSQL database. You will have the Mahout. I'm not sure that it's really pronounced that way, but it's a way you will have the machine learning part of it. You will have Storm, which is a way to analyze the streams of data in real or nearly real time. And also Spark, which could be used in a way similar to Storm, but in a way it provides you a lot more functionality And specifically looking at the machine learning, I think it's something that's really interesting. Now, when you provision one of those servers, you will actually get a lot of additional utilities from the Hadoop stack, which you can see here. They're there, they're supported, they're part of the cluster. And you can actually extend the cluster with custom script and run even more projects on top of this cluster. So essentially what you will get is a fully configured and running Hadoop cluster the way you want it, and it would be really provisioned in a couple of minutes. I don't know how many of you guys worked on provisioning a Hadoop cluster from zero, but it's a very steep learning curve, or at least that was a very steep learning curve for me. So considering all this, if we go and look at the IoT reference architecture that I kind of showed you previously, you will start notice that there's actually a lot more into this. It's not only the Azure services that are provided there from Microsoft, but actually there are a lot of open source components that you can use. And I would say that some of the very interesting parts are related to Spark streaming and Apache Storm as a way to use them, but also working with Apache Kafka as a data ingestion. It's a very interesting alternative. And some people would ask, why would I go this way? And why would Microsoft will take the trouble to support this? I mean, there are like a lot of reasons. You can have an existing infrastructure of components that you would like to migrate to the Azure cloud. So this could be like an easy way or an easy path for migration. The other way around would be you're starting a project, you would like to start with small clusters, like provision them. You don't want at this point to be really bound to specific like providers. So, you have this flexibility to use those tools. So if we look at the stream analytics, we have a complete path starting from getting the information from data, acquiring this data, analyzing these data, and storing these data into the Azure cloud, completely going open source. So in the next slides, I will actually explore this path, and just to kind of show you as developers that are using Java and guys that are more or less bound to the open source stack, what you can actually do. So I guess the biggest players and the most interesting part, considering that more or less we are speaking about big data, would be Apache Storm and Apache Spark. Like these two projects are really, really the big players on the hot path analysis. Now there's been a lot of discussions when to use Spark, when to use Storm, are they duplicating the functionality, and I mean there's a lot of debates. If I have to kind of summarize, the pros and cons or the difference in like really 2 or 3 sentences, I would say that the general opinion would be that if you want to analyze the data in real time or nearly real time and really be able to work on each package separately, most probably you will go with Storm. If you are working on streaming data and you will process it on batches, most probably you will go with Spark. And that would be, in a very, very high level, the general differences. Of course, it's a very rough explanation. It's much more complicated but I would say this kind of summarizes where are the two differences. Now, for the demo, I would say for the workshop tomorrow, you've seen I have provisioned some clusters, and I will actually show you how you can provision them yourself and what are the things that you can do. So in the next couple of slides, I will show you which are the options that are available for you there. So if you go in provisioning an HD inside clusters, specifically I'll be talking about Storm and Spark, but as you can see, you have a pretty wide selection to choose. You can provision a general Hadoop cluster, an H-based cluster, or a Hive or an R server. You also, when you are provisioning either Storm or Spark, you could select what kind of an operating system you would like to use, whether to use Linux or Windows. Preferably, I usually use Linux. In a way, it's more natural to me. And also, I guess the interesting part, you can kind of select the specific version of the cluster that you would like to use. And really, that's something that's very important, because if you're using, I would say, SDKs or other JDKs or kind of a libraries that you are connecting to this cluster, some of them have really dependencies on the specific version. Specifically, when I was working on some of the demos, I provisioned the latest and greatest Spark 2.0, but I kind of realized that I was missing some of the functionality there. For example, I was missing some of the Scala connectors that I was using that were not compatible with this version. And also, specifically for Azure, I found out that at this point, it doesn't support Jupyter and Livy, which was something that I'm kind of used to work. So a very short sentence about Apache Storm. If you're not familiar, it's like really scalable and distributed system for processing information in nearly real time. The things that you will have, the basic, let's say, things you will find there is spouts and boats. Spouts are kind of, let's say, small components that allowed you to kind of get data or read data from specific sources. And boats are these parts of the code that allows you to transform this information and actually make something useful out of it. What I found out is that if you go to GitHub or to some of the resources from Microsoft, there are a bunch of already developed spouts that kind of allows you to connect to some of the existing infrastructure. For example, I found out there are spouts that allowed me to connect to IoT Hub or the Event Hub, which was something that I used for data ingestion. Of course, there are all those spouts that are available, for example, for connection to Kafka, and you can really use them. Also, there are boats for kind of saving information or processing information, and you can find existing ones that are allowing you to store data on Azure storage and really work with this information. So if you kind of go and provision a Storm cluster, you will see two interesting points. Now, there is something that's called scale cluster. Just let's get back. Here on this slide, you will notice that when you provision a cluster, I try to provision the smallest cluster available. You will see it's like it has like 6 nodes. It comes with Nimbus, a supervisor, and a Zookeeper. I kind of reduced the number of cores in order to reduce the node size. The reason I do that is because when you provision a Hadoop cluster, you are actually charged at the moment it's actually running. It's not that you're not charged only when it's processing data, but the moment it's actually up and running, actually you are charged. This is something that you should be careful about. So if you don't need the cluster, you don't need really to keep it up and running. There are a number of things that you can do. For example, if you are experimenting, you can create a really small cluster. Or if you are kind of processing data only on specific periods of time and not really at real time, what you can do is use templates or the so-called Azure Resource Management templates, for short ARM templates, to kind of bring up your cluster and after that kind of tear it down. Also, if you have an ongoing and running cluster, that's something that's called scale cluster that kind of allows you to go to the resource manager and kind of increase the number of nodes that you are using. Now, once you provision that, you actually come with a bunch of, I would say, familiar and interesting dashboards. And the one that's interesting for Storm is Ambari. And you will notice on this side all the services that are actually up and running by provisioning the cluster. It's not only the Storm, but actually you have a lot of other tools. And you will notice that here you also have Kafka. So if you decide to go and kind of create IoT scenario, which kind of ingests data from Kafka and is kind of, I would say, processing it through Storm, you have this all up and running for you. Now, there is also something interesting, and it's you have the ability to add more services. And I would say the interesting points here is that you can have the Kafka storage, provision, and also Mahout if you want to do some machine learning. And machine learning would be really interesting in the let's say, context of IoT in scenarios like predictive maintenance. For example, you will be looking at the parameters for, let's say, an engine, how it's running, and you will try to predict when some parts will be broken, so you can kind of schedule a maintenance. So that's really an interesting path to take. So overall, if you go with that, you have two options. You have the self-hosted option, which is kind of you can use your own virtual machines in a way to create your own, let's say, compile your own Hadoop cluster. But you can also have the managed service going with the Microsoft HD inside and kind of rely on what's been pre-configured for you. So in a way, if I go back and kind of show you the original hot path for working, for operating with data, you will see that it's completely possible to have the devices, to have, for example, IoT Hub as a way for data ingestion and actually have all the way processing the data through Storm and completely go open source from this point forward for visualizing the data. So it's an interesting option to take. The other option would be if you go with the Apache Spark. And I briefly mentioned it, it's really a lot more. Oh, wow. The time is really running fast. So it actually provides a lot more. And the thing that I find really interesting is the machine learning part of it, which is actually available and up and running for you. So if you start provisioning a cluster like that, it's a smaller one. It's like only 3 nodes. You also are able to scale it out in a way to add more. And you also have this familiar dashboard that's kind of providing you with this additional functionality. I would say that the most interesting parts here is the yarn, which kind of helps you to see how are your jobs running and the things that you have provisioned and as jobs. And the one that I find particularly useful to remotely deploy your jobs. Now, you are actually provided with a bunch of interesting tools that you can access. Of course, the Spark History Server is very useful, but the thing that I found most useful for me is the Jupyter Notebooks. And if you're not familiar with the notebooks, it's a kind of a, let's say, web interface that you can use to quickly kind of scribble kind of a script to test something, test your idea for processing this data. And it comes with different kernels. The ones that are provisioned directly are one with Python and one with Scala. So it's an interesting way to go. During the workshop tomorrow, I will actually go over, an example, and I will show you how you can actually do some predictive maintenance on let's say, a heating system. And just quickly to show, that's a Python code that I've actually run, and it completed. It goes all the way for training the model, getting the data, and actually giving results whether or not specific location would be hotter or colder, depending on the overall information that was gotten by the air conditioning system. Now, I have to note that in a way Spark is like better supported maybe in terms of tools because there are like 2 very interesting plugins for both IntelliJ and Azure, sorry, Eclipse. And I kind of use them. So it's an easy way for you to create an application either in Java or in Scala and deploy it locally, test it locally, or kind of automatically deployed it into the cluster. So that's pretty much both on Spark and Storm and overall view of the HD Insight and what you can do in terms of big data. But in the remaining kind of 10 minutes, I believe, I would cover something that I found really interesting. And it's actually, I've seen it done by one of my ex-colleagues. And it's really related to containers. And you know, during the last couple of years, we all love containers, that they really provide a lot of benefits. So if you're using them, it's cool. There is a service that Azure provides, which is called Azure Container Service. that kind of allows you to run either Docker or DC OS, you can provision those solutions as a services from the Azure Container Service. So what is the Azure Container Service? It's really the infrastructure as R templates, and depending on which way you prefer, you can go either with Docker Swarm or DC OS for the orchestration and the applications that you will put on top. So I guess Docker is the most, pretty much everyone would be familiar with Docker. But when we are talking about containers, not everything is Docker, I would say. And people are forgetting about the so-called Smack stack, which is a container that's kind of running Spark, Mesos, Cassandra, and Kafka. And actually, when I started with big data, that was pretty much the first stack that I kind of provisioned and started using. So in a way, I would say that it's interesting because DCOS actually comes from Mesosphere, and you can actually run your Docker containers there, but it provides a lot more. And you can kind of easily provision that on Azure. It has pretty much full support. And the interesting part is that the DCOS comes with the entire universe of services from Mesosphere. And as you will see, like these are two familiar names here. It's Kafka and Spark. And that's another way for you to kind of provision those clusters. If you don't want to go with the HD inside, and you have an existing like service, or you would like to go with more managed way to build your own service, you can definitely provision them from there. And you can actually have Marathon to kind of schedule your jobs and do interesting stuff. But the things come really interesting if you can combine the containers with virtual machine scale sets, which is another kind of a service from Azure. And what are actually scale sets? So scale sets are a way for you to really kind of scale out your solution in a programmatic way. So you don't need to really go to the resource manager and kind of provision additional services. So for example, if you want to replicate one node in multiple ways, a good way to do this is using the virtual machine scale sets. So virtual machine scale sets kind of provides you a way to really go and programmatically create this so you don't really have to worry about it. And there is a particular feature there which is called autoscale. And autoscale is a way to kind of create, let's say, a solution where if certain conditions are met, the scale set would automatically expand and increase. And there's a couple ways you can do this, or you can schedule it for a specific day on a schedule, or some metrics like, for example, if you are having a lot of data ingestion and you are lagging behind processing the data, you might bring up additional clusters. And that's actually what I found out one of my ex-colleagues did. He actually provisioned Kafka with Mesosphere, and he used the virtual machine scale sets with Marathon. So when he starts his data ingestion, the cluster is really small. But at the point that it's really getting a lot of data, this autoscale set really kicks in and kind of increase the number of Kafka clusters. So this kind of allows him this elasticity to be able to get more data. And in a way, that's pretty much what you will get from IoT Hub, this automatic scaling. So that's one way if you prefer to use Kafka to create a similar solution. So I think that we are kind of near the end of the presentation. What you can really do next. First, of course, you can come tomorrow to the workshop and check out some of the cool things that we can do there. Of course, you can try Azure. There is a really way to try it for free using the Dev Essentials and start provisioning some of the services there. Just for example, IoT Hub is also available. There's a free tier that kind of allows you to work with a limited number of messages per day, but there are a number of services that really doesn't cost you anything. You can learn more about Java and OS open source on Azure. You can definitely check out the Java samples on GitHub. And of course, because a large part of the SDKs are open source, you are more than welcome to contribute. So there is a bunch of links and information that you can go in terms of Java references. Related to Hortonworks and HD Inside, you can actually start on your local laptop with the sandbox and kind of a provision than a cluster on Azure. And of course, you can go and give it a try for the container service if it's something that's really interesting for you. And that's pretty much all I had to share with you today. We kind of have 5 minutes till the end, so if you have any questions, like shoot, and I will try to address them. I can't really see from the light, so all right, so it's quite early in the morning, so I haven't had my coffee, so I don't think that's tried myself. All right, okay, so I guess that was it. All right, guys, thank you.